Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. Just to note that there's not going to be a Q&A next week. I'm going to have some scheduling things that are going to get in the way of that, and I would never want to just rush through one of these. I always want to take my time and make sure that I do them right and try to answer all the questions to the best of my ability. So rather than try to rush through one or do it late, I'm just going to skip it, and then we'll be all caught up so that, it's usually been going live to the public a week after. And I think the way I'm going to do it now is just make it public the same day that it airs to everybody, but just continue to be responding to the comments and questions on the subscription services only. So there's still, there's still some benefit to being a subscriber for the Q&As. But please give me your thoughts on that. If you feel strongly one way or another, I'm totally open to doing whatever is best for all of you. And also, I was wondering if this is a time to rearrange any of the way I post these videos. I'd spoken to a lot of people who follow the YouTube algorithm trends, and they all say that it's probably going to be a better idea to move off some of the lower hit videos so that the bigger production videos will get caught in the algorithm because they don't see the channel as, putting mixed content on it. I'm trying to oversimplify what they said so I don't bore everybody to death, but some ideas people had were to take all of my content that's not the weeklies and put that on one channel and then have just the weeklies on another channel, so the roundup and the Q&A and nothing else. And then the other idea was to take just the Q&As off of the RetroRGB channel and put them onto a separate one, maybe a personal channel or something like that. And that way it takes kind of the low-hit videos off of the main channel. I don't have any clue what the right thing to do is. I don't even have the slightest inclination of what's best for the algorithm, for the channel, for the other contributors to RetroRGB. I got nothing. So I'm really interested to hearing everybody's opinion. I'll definitely check the YouTube comments on this one as well, just to hear people's thoughts, because I really just want to do what's best for everybody. As far as me personally goes, like I always cared more about RetroRGB as a whole. So, anything that's going to help everybody else is what I want to do. And of course, I want to make sure that all the supporters feel like I'm doing my best to cater to what could make it easier for you as well. So any thoughts on that would be greatly appreciated. I've been putting this off for a long time because I don't know what the right thing to do is, and I've changed my mind 4 or 5 times on how I should be going about doing this. So I'd love to hear from all of you, and I'll talk to some more people as well and see if I could figure something out. Or maybe I'll be scared to make a change, leave well enough alone, and just go back to doing it exactly the way I have been. Who knows? But anyway, let's jump into the questions. First up, over on Floatplane, Pete from MMonkey wanted to chime in about the centering issue It's a Serial WoW was having. And he actually linked to a couple of different things. One is a board that's RGBS in, and it passes through a vertical and horizontal position adjustment. And I've seen this board, actually it was the same one Pete recommended for my mini MVS machine, and it looks to be a similar circuit. So this is pretty cool. It's only $40 from AliExpress. I haven't tested it, so I can't vouch for how safe it would be. You might want to put it on a scope and test it just to double check. But it looks like you could either choose RGBS in audio input through RCA connectors or a SCART connector. And it seems to be based off of Tim's circuit for it that's been posted on his website. So that's a pretty interesting device. I really liked the Ashen switch, the SCA 101, that had this centering position controls. So it's cool to see these features in there. There's I've stumbled across a bunch of other problems where there was slight image shift, not enough where it would make me, not want to play the game that way, but if I had the option to do something like this, I absolutely would. So much appreciated, Pete. Thanks very much for linking to that. Now over on Patreon, first up, it looks like Cam had double posted, and I think this is the perfect time to bring this up. A bunch of people had emailed me saying that there were problems using the Patreon app. I'm not sure if it was the app or the web interface, but when they posted their questions, or pretty much any comment in these, it would show up and then disappear, or not show up at all, or the page would crash or something. And a few people said that they weren't able to get through at all. So it looks like Cam probably had the issue where it didn't post, it didn't show up, they posted another one and it came back. So I'm honestly really, really sorry for any trouble like that at all. If that happens, please understand that I did not delete anything. Like, I've never deleted a comment, at least that I could remember on any of these. It's just an honest mistake in the Patreon software. And if you need something, if you need info on something, or you really want me to talk about something, message me directly if you're having problems with the questions. But sorry about that. Anyway, Cam's question is, they recently picked up a Time Sleuth, and they're having a hard time getting their custom firmware on it. They've read through my and Dan's site looking for instructions, but they're having a hard time figuring it out. Could you show us the adapter cable you used to flash your custom firmware and walk us briefly through the process? So I think I have my adapter right here. It is a cheap USB blaster, super cheap, comes with the cable, and I think it even comes with the USB cable that you need, and that's all I used. However, I had so many problems with this, and I think it was linked to Windows and a Windows update, because I followed the instructions exactly as Dan said, and it kept crashing. It wouldn't flash all the way. I bought 3 more USB blasters from 3 different places to make sure I wasn't just buying a cheap knockoff or something. They all did the same thing, and it would take 10 tries and it would eventually work. Then one day, as Windows often does these days, I woke up to, please reboot your computer. There's been a Windows update. And later on that day, I plugged it in and it flashed in the first try. No problems whatsoever. So I could only assume that it was a Windows driver issue or something like that causing the problem. That's just a guess. It could have been a million things. But that's pretty much it. So just don't get a cheap $2 knockoff USB blaster. They might work, they might not. Spend, I think the one I bought was like $15 on Amazon or something like that. Make sure to get the correct Intel software, and then just follow the instructions and cross your fingers, and it should go that easily. But I mean, it was a nightmare. I couldn't flash anything. I tried manually flashing the OSSC, the CPS2 HDMI firmware. Nothing was working on a handful of different USB blasters, and then after the Windows update, everything worked. So sorry you're having the same trouble I am, but hopefully that advice would point you in the right direction. And if you're still having problems, maybe I could do a very quick video showing how I do it. I could probably use to have some extra content like that for weeks where, I'm 50 hours into a video and don't have enough time to finish it before Monday. So, I'd love to be able to have a couple of things just kind of laying around for when I need a video to release. So maybe I'll do that one anyway. Looks like Bad Reality had a bunch of questions this week, so I'm just going to try to go through all of them quickly just to make sure to allow time for everybody else's as well. First, they were talking about the Bubba SCART switch shootout, the Phone Dork response, and they had a bunch of nice things to say about Phone Dork. I agree. He was one of the people that, I think his little segment about Mega Man using that cheap SCART to HDMI scaler was the perfect description of everything you would really need to know that's not scientific details about it. He showed the motion blur, showed how bad the variable lag was, and then switched over to an NEC XM29 and was able to beat the Mega Man level right away. I think that was game-changing for me when I saw that. I thought it made me laugh, but it was also a brilliantly articulated way to demonstrate to people what it's like. And people often forget that, Phone Dork's been flying the flag for low lag everything for 5+ years now. So definitely somebody I look up to, and it's once again, very freaking cool that he did that video. Next, if I want to feed component video through an Extron switch, do you think it'd be safe to do so? Yes, safe as far as you're probably not going to hurt anything. You would just need those passive RGB to, just the 3 colored RCA connector to D-sub VGA adapters, and just give it a try. Shouldn't really do anything at all. As you said, I would plug them into the RGB jacks just like that and see. And if for whatever reason it doesn't work, you could try swapping around the colors. Just make sure they match on the outside. Next, you know how the RetroTink 2X is a professional zero-lag video upscaler for the low-end price tier. I think there's room in the marketplace for the highest-end price tier video upscaler if it has the right options. So I agree 100%. I would love to see a 4K or 8K scaler with every option imaginable. I think just like there are audiophiles out there that will that would much rather spend $2,000 on the best receiver possible. And there's also people out there that just want to listen to surround sound and probably wouldn't appreciate the difference. I mean that respectfully. Some people just don't care about certain things than others. I'm like that way with some things and not others. Like color compression in video games doesn't bother me nearly as much as like motion blur or stuff like that. So everybody's eyes and ears are different. That's totally cool. However, I think the biggest thing holding people back are the ability to get some of the chips that are out there, because there's a couple companies that kind of monopolize things, as well as the lack of something like an 8K compatible FPGA. And I think once that stuff hits the market, we probably would see like a $1,500 OSSC or something like that. But it's really just going to take it's going to take the hardware to catch up to everything with a somewhat reasonable price point. But yeah, I absolutely do think that it's something that we need. I think you had a few more down here. So no GBA VGA consolizer or Sega Dreamcast on your video about classic gaming on VGA monitors. Nope, that video was very specifically about original consoles on VGA monitors. I didn't want to confuse people, and I also didn't have time to go through all that. I'm really trying to stick to a schedule of 3 videos a week, and you know, there's good and bad to that. In a perfect world, I would take my time and have really in-depth, extensive videos on this like I used to do, like 30, 40-minute videos that goes through everything. But people weren't sitting through all of them. YouTube hates that stuff. They would rather have you do a bunch of 10-minute videos, or now 8-minute videos if you've seen that latest update. So it's just, you know, I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not crapping on anybody that is. That's not what I do. But I have to play by their rules if I want to get promoted, in order to promote the things that I really do work on all the time. The website, the development work, and of course, making videos. But maybe one of these days I could go back because I save almost all of this Premiere sessions. So maybe I can go back and take things like, if I have 3 videos on the same subject, just kind of slap them together, re-edit them, and then upload them, maybe on YouTube as well, but certainly on other platforms as one long form video that has all the information in it. I think that might actually just be a fun project to do if I ever, if I only have a day to kill but need 3 days to make a video. So, all right, let me just try to slap one of these together. But yeah, unfortunately, you gotta, if you want to get picked up in the algorithm, you gotta play by their rules. So I'd rather do 2 videos about a similar subject and release them a week apart than mix them all in the same, just for that reason. I mean, that came out wrong. I would rather make the one big video, but I would have to do it that way if I want to get picked up, so to keep promoting everything else. You had a suggestion about overlays and about how the animations in my videos work. I am not nearly smart enough to make those. A friend of mine made those for me a couple years ago, and made me a whole bunch of new ones that I haven't really used too much because I wanted to make a whole bunch of different updates and everything. So I just think that it's awesome that I have custom transitions, and I'm going to be using them until there's a reason why I have to move to something else, because I just think it's awesome. But I mean, if I were making big production videos every week, like Netflix documentaries, I would actually have custom transitions for every single video that I did that matches the content and stuff like that. But that would add like a full day to every video, and it's something that I appreciate, but it's not going to make a difference in how well the video does. So, once again, not to be complaining, I really love what I do, but I gotta just keep grinding and keep this going. Otherwise, if you spend too much time on one video, the videos don't get out, and unfortunately, that's just the way it is. I think that was it. One more, James Rolfe released a video about, I think I saw the thumbnail for that, I guess, about him playing guitar, and Bad Reality jokingly said, when are you and a bunch of other people going to make a metal album? To be honest, I love music, and I've been talking about getting back into doing some stuff, and that's another reason I asked at the beginning of this about people's opinions on, how to work through the channel, how to put videos and different things and stuff like that. And I want to make sure to get this right, but I've worked my whole life to be somewhat okay at guitar, and I'm losing the skills because I'm not playing that often. So I either got to just quit playing guitar or do some videos on it to get my skills back up, because it's just, I miss playing, but I need a reason to. So while I don't know if I'll be making a metal album with other YouTubers, I will absolutely be doing a few different collaborations and stuff. One hopefully should be out by the end of the month. So I think that's it for Bad Reality. So hopefully I answered all your questions good enough. Bradley wants to know if there's anyone working on an optical drive emulator to replace the optical drive in a Sega CD. It's great that we have the option for the Mega SD and Mega EverDrive Pro, but I love having my Sega CD set up, and it's always a great conversation piece. There's been rumors about it. I don't know if anybody's actually done it or even have a working prototype, but I agree completely. And there's also so many Sega CDs out there with broken drive assemblies, broken lasers, the broken helical gear, that I just think would be really awesome that if they were able to be put to use. It is like other consoles, though, in that eventually you're going to have to recap a Sega CD. There's other things that can go wrong on it. There's boards that can go wrong on it. So I understand why it hasn't been a priority versus doing it through the cartridge. But I agree that I really would love to see some kind of ODE for every console for people that want a more authentic look. The one thing that you could always do is you could open up your Sega CD very carefully and disconnect the board that kind of clips into the Genesis, so that you could have it all together, but it's not actually electrically connected to the Sega CD. So it's still, you could have the look of the Tower of Power and then use the optical drive emulator for it. For me, I just, when I have it set up, I just kind of unplug it a little bit, or I use my CDX for original discs and 32X CD, and then use everything else for any other of my Genesis carts and the Mega SD for Sega CD games. But yeah, I'll keep everybody posted if there's any solid news. I hope it happens, but as far as I know, there isn't anything, and I do understand why. Dark Aries chimed in to clarify what happens if you try to run audio through the video BNC ports of an Extron Crosspoint. You can do it, but it 100% isn't intended. It doesn't work on the HV jacks if the Crosspoint advertises sync processing. If you only use the RGB jacks, passing audio through will work, but you have the wrong termination and may run into issues in the future. However, I know someone who uses a 32x32 just so they can avoid the Phoenix plugs and haven't heard of any issues. Another positive for using the actual audio connectors is that the Crosspoint can adjust volume levels if you use the control software, among having balanced and unbalanced input-output mixing. So thank you so much for clarifying all of that. And your comment about if the Crosspoint advertises sync processing, it doesn't work on the HV jacks, that explains why it worked for some people and not others on the HV jacks. So really appreciate that. And also just another shout out to Dark Aries and the R3 Wiki. I rely on them all the time, so thank you very much for all of your patience and help. You really are making all of the research I do better, and hopefully making the videos better too. So thanks for chiming in, and thanks for all the help. Joseph Vessel said the Nintendo Switch seems to have varying levels of input lag depending on how you choose to play, docked, handheld, etc. However, this is just my perception, and I have no way of knowing for certain without some scientific testing. I'd love to see a definitive analysis of this. I'm pretty sensitive to input lag, and it seems to me that there's a wide variation between the Switch Lite, regular Switch, Switch docked with detached Joy-Cons, Switch docked with the Pro Controller, and finally Switch docked with the controller plugged into the dock itself. Oddly, I swear that the Switch docked with controller directly plugged into the dock provides the greatest amount of input lag. For modern games, I don't think this matters, but the Switch is home to some great shmups and arcade ports where the lowest input lag possible matters. So what you're telling me is what I've heard quite a bit over the years. I've never done testing myself, so this is all speculation and hearsay, if you will. But I have had people, or I've seen research from people that tried to do real lag testing, and what you said, how it plugged in via USB, did seem to have more lag than just using wireless controllers. This is kind of one of the main issues that developers talk about for modern consoles is variable controller lag and, the wireless frequencies they use. It is odd that they couldn't figure out a way, especially with something like the Pro controller, if you plug it in wired, why they couldn't figure out a way to make it faster. My only suggestion in all of this, because there really isn't much you could do about it other than try to find people that have done real measurements and just use whatever they found to be the quickest way. You could do other things like make sure there's nothing else in the chain. Sometimes if you run your switch through like an AVR that processes the signal, that will add lag. Some have game modes. So make sure, to turn on the game mode on your AVR if you have it, or try plugging it right into your TV and turn your TV's game mode on, stuff like that, just to lower the latency. I do think the biggest issue is the variable latency, which is what I always talk about with bad scalers as well. Generally speaking, for your average person, 1 or even 2 frames of lag, so maybe it's the scaler, maybe it's input, maybe it's your TV, whatever, but even 2 frames of lag, if it's solid, if it's always 2 frames, most people wouldn't notice that and would probably be able to complete their games like normal. But when you have lag that swings all over the place, sometimes it's half a frame, sometimes it's 2 frames, sometimes it's 1 frame, that's when you could never really gauge your timing and adjust. So unfortunately, my answer to your question is a total cop-out. It's, I think you're right. I just don't know what to do about it. So my apologies there. But there's got to be other people out there that have tested newer firmware versions of the Switch and see if any of that stuff has been tested and has some real numbers to it. Rick had an interesting question, and I think I understand it. My apologies in advance if I'm getting it wrong, but I'll just read through it. RGB through a PVM looks fantastic. However, will you get any difference running an RGB modified NES through a FrameMeister than somehow to composite to the cheap CRT I've had since I was a kid? 1, I don't know if it's doable to step down to composite, and 2, if there's any difference running that to my cheap CRT. What do I need to do to go to it from a FrameMeister? I love my RGB setup, but would like to connect a CRT with minimum hassle. So, if you're asking if processing RGB through any scaler and then converting that output to composite video will get a better quality output than just composite video from a NES, that part of the answer, I don't really think you would have a better signal. Also, I'm pretty sure the NES RGB kit, if you installed the Switch, you could turn it off and use the original composite output, and I believe it even generates its own composite video output as well. So you don't really need any processors for it. And if your NES RGB kit doesn't have a switch, you should be able to install one fairly easily. You don't have to cut anything if you don't want to either. You could even just like leave a wire dangling out the back with a, connected to a switch with some heat shrink tubing or something so it doesn't pull out. But I think that's what you're getting at. I'm really sorry if I'm misunderstanding, but please ask again if I messed that up. Also, completely unrelated, have you found a new beer you're enjoying recently, or still that imported porter you talked about a couple months back? I'm not sure if it was a porter, but I really liked that one. Let me check my phone because I actually found a whiskey yesterday. I'm not usually a huge whiskey fan, but Beast kind of got me back into it. Legent, Legent. I don't know if this picture is going to show up, but I was at a liquor store in New Jersey, and I heard the one of the people who worked there talking to somebody. I guess somebody had asked for a whiskey recommendation, and the person who worked there very clearly was not running some sales pitch. They very clearly love whiskey and was very excited about that. And they said it was like a mix or a cross between a Japanese whiskey and an Irish whiskey. And it was $40 for a pretty big bottle. So it's not cheap, but it's not, top shelf. And I absolutely loved it. I had it, just on the rocks, and I thought it was one of the best whiskeys I've had in a long time. So while I'm not a huge whiskey guy, I will definitely be buying that one again, but I'm more of a beer person. So if anybody wants a whiskey recommendation, try that one. Obed Samuel said they have recently purchased a VA0 Japanese Mega Drive 1 in great condition. I'm currently unsure whether I want to mod it, as it's a piece of Sega history. That said, if I do decide to mod the console, do you think there would be any benefit in a triple bypass? After all, the VAO and the VA1 are the gold standard for Mega Drive sound quality. Surely any aftermarket amp would degrade the output on these particular revisions. Also, the Japanese consoles do not have an RF modulator, which is a great location for the mini DIN. Do you have any recommendations for another noise-free location to install the mini DIN? Finally, the board layout is much different than any other Mega Drive or Genesis console. I could poke around with a multimeter, but ideally I would like a schematic for the console. I've searched the internet and Console 5, but yet to find one for these very early Japanese consoles. Any suggestions? So that is a very interesting scenario. My personal opinion on this one, now this is not fact, it's just what I would probably do, is I would leave that Mega Drive alone, because you're right, it is a neat piece of history. And the sound is already great in those, and if you were going to use it with RGB, you could very carefully just lift the subcarrier pin and get yourself a really great RGB output. It would disable composite video, or to be specific, composite video would work just with no color. It would only be in black and white. But I mean, that would be a great way to do it. And you would just have yourself an awesome console. The Genesis mods video I did, I think I showed that in there. I can't remember if I did. I was eventually going to do the Genesis advanced mod video, but that ended up turning into the triple bypass video. So, that's a good way to do it. I love the triple bypass, so if you're into modding and you have the ability to do it, I would pick up like a Genesis 3 and throw a triple bypass in there so that you could have the best of both worlds. And they're still fairly cheap. Genesis 2s as well. So, that would just be my choice in the matter. If you did decide that you wanted to mod that, all of my testing on quite a few Genesis ones with the triple bypass installations, especially if you have the version 2, the sound is usually identical to the onboard Genesis sound. Some models I've tested have less ground noise when you use the triple bypass, though. So technically, you could say it's better. People would argue different size of that, but if you're listening with headphones, you could hear less hum than you would on a stock. Not all models, not all motherboard revisions, but that has happened. So installing a triple bypass, it's never going to take away from the audio. It just might not, in certain Model 1s, add anything to it, other than the fact that you're bypassing onboard components with brand new ones. So maybe you'll squeeze more life out of the Genesis. Who knows? That's probably stretching. If you did want to mod it, Jose did do a Genesis or a Mega Drive one without the RF, and what he ended up doing was cutting the traces to the DIN and using the original DIN for video, and then wiring line level audio to the front headphone port. There is a different mod you could do to the triple bypass version 2 that runs it, re-enables the headphone amp essentially. But if you don't need headphones, I would just run the line out to that, and then you just use a typical RGB cable that gets audio from the front. So that's certainly a way to do it. But to be honest, I do kind of agree. Maybe that's one to just leave alone. As far as the schematic or anything goes, you should be able to follow any of the guides for the Mega Amp to install the audio, and for video, just trace out the pins in the VDP to find RGBS, and all of that is on the RGB bypass page on the website. Alex Upton just wanted a quick confirmation on installing a triple bypass into a Genesis, and the question was on these wires, so I'll zoom out real quick, are these soldered to the resistor, or are the resistors removed? And on the white and gray lines, the resistors are removed and it's soldered to the pad, just like you see up here with the black wire. It's the same thing. The SMD component is removed, and then you're soldering just to that other one. To be honest, I had to double check. I was 99% sure that was correct, but I checked with Tian and Jose, and they both confirmed that that's the correct way. So I'm still looking forward to eventually doing documentation for this, but there's not enough hours in the day to do all of it. So hopefully when the wiki launches, people will be able to contribute. And heck, even stuff like this, even little things like if you had a wiki account and you just logged in and said, by the way, the white and gray lines have the SMD components removed, even small things like that, it's going to be a giant help. So so that's an easy one. Blue Rigel 81 had a good question. They use a RetroTink 2X for the 480i output of the original Xbox, GameCube, and PS2, and really like how the smoothing filter helps with the jagged edges. I agree. I think that smoothing filter is awesome, and it's really great for such a cheap device, cheap relatively speaking. But for the 480p output of those consoles, the RetroTink isn't compatible, so they were able to just use a Porta component to HDMI converter. And for anybody that doesn't know, that's just the basic analog to digital converters. So you still have to run it in 480p to get 480p, run the consoles in 480p to get 480p. It doesn't scale it, but it also adds 0 milliseconds of lag as well because it doesn't do any processing. Now, unfortunately, because there's no smoothing filter on something like the Porta, the jagged edges are kind of back, and Blue Rigel 81 would like a way to get similar smoothing on the 480i output as well. So this right here is the only time I've seen the M cable look really good. And I don't mean to offend anybody. I know people love that thing. I definitely hate the way it looks with retro consoles. That's just my opinion. And I don't think it makes any difference at all on, PS3, PS4, Switch, and anything like that. I don't think it adds anything. But 480p out of all of those consoles, I did really like the way it looked. And I even showed, thanks to Dave, how the Xbox in both 480p and 720p looked through the M cable, and I really was impressed. I thought it really made it worth it. So while I would like to see a device that does everything, if you're looking for exactly that, 480p with essentially a smoothing filter, I would at least give the M cable a try. M cable or M Classic, I think they'll both do the same thing. And I did test that, and it does not add any lag as long as you're the original ones in game mode or something like that. As long as you buy the gaming edition ones, pretty much, it will not add any lag. It looks good. I definitely think that you should at least consider that one. And hopefully someday we'll have devices that could scale in any resolution. Like imagine the OSSC Pro, if that had smoothing filters along with it, and up to 1080p. Hopefully that'll happen someday as well. Drew has a question about Extron Crosspoints and component cables. They have two CRTs, a consumer Sony Trinitron with component video inputs, and a Sony PVM 1344Q. I have HD RetroVision cables, and if I were to run everything through the Crosspoint and out to both CRTs, would I need to add anything in the chain to process the signal on either end? I've seen people use RCA to BNC connectors to connect an Extron Crosspoint, but I've never been able to confirm if there's something else that needs to be done to run different displays that have different inputs or signal requirements. So there's two answers to that. First is because it's a matrix switch, you could send anything in and anything out. So inputs 1, 2, and 3 could be RGBS, RGBHV, and YPBPR. And then outputs 1, 2, and 3 could go to 3 different devices that each accept that different signal. And as long as you send the right input to the right output, it's all that matters, and there's no problems whatsoever. The only issue is it doesn't convert any of the signals. So while just using basic RCA to BNC connectors and plugging in your component cables will work perfectly fine, if that PVM 1344Q doesn't accept component video input, you have to either only send it RGB or then have an output go to something like the comp to RGB from one of the RetroTink products and into that PVM. I can't remember off the top of my head if that one accepts component video or just RGB, so my apologies. But if the PVM does accept component, cool. If it doesn't, you're either going to need to send it RGB or have some converter coming out of the Crosspoint. But once again, the Crosspoint itself can accept many different signals and output to whichever one. You just got to make sure that you route it properly with the buttons in front. Kirk just picked up an Atari 2600 6 switch that looks like it's new. It has the original power supply with it, and being such an old console and unsure how long ago it was last used, do you think I need to take any precautions before switching it on? Should I be replacing the caps just based on its age? So there's a few things I would do. I would absolutely open it up just to be safe. Brace yourself that you very often find some crispy critters in there that's been kind of mummified in the corners. And I would always very carefully do some kind of cleaning. At the very least, a soft brush and some compressed air. If it's gross, which you said it looks new, so awesome, but if it was gross, I would do the wash it in the sink thing like I always show. And then I would just take a moment to look at the components and see if there's anything that stands out. Is there gunk underneath one of the capacitors, which means it's leaking? Then, yeah, probably just replace whatever you see. Is the voltage regulator... I mean, it's so old, you might want to just replace the voltage regulator with a new one. They're very cheap parts and everything. Maybe save the original just in case you need to put it back for whatever crazy reason you might think about. But other than that, that's pretty much it. Just check the capacitors, check to see if there's, make sure there's no damage, clean it out, and consider replacing the voltage regulator just for the heck of it. The only other thing I might look into is the power supply. So the power supplies are aging as well. Maybe if you could find one that matches up, maybe Triad makes one that's a perfect match, that you could use a nice brand new power supply as well. That could certainly be a help. But other than that, I mean, it's fairly basic with the Ataris. They're pretty, pretty simple machines, so you don't have to look for anything crazy. But I would just give it a once over before powering it on and kind of just go from there. Jason Guffey, looks like there's a 3-part question, so I'll try to answer it all in one shot, but I might have to cut myself in because I want to make sure I answer them right. First, this is kind of a big-ish topic, but I'm considering putting together a custom emulation-based arcade cabinet as a friend's wedding gift, and I'd like any suggestions where I should start. Do you think it would be wiser to go with a Raspberry Pi 4 or something similar, or to use an actual PC built to run these emulators? I know you're an actual hardware guy like me, but my friend would probably rather have an all-in-one emulation station than have his new wife yell at him for collecting cartridges like me. Any suggestions on this topic, as well as about designs for the actual cabinet itself, would be appreciated. So, if money's not an object, building a fast PC is going to perform better than a Raspberry Pi 4. However, I've been pleased with MAME emulation on the Pi. It's not perfect, but it doesn't stink, that's for sure. Also, if you're building something from scratch versus modifying an original arcade cabinet, there are devices out there like the JAMA Pi where you could plug that right in. I don't know if it's compatible with the Pi 4. You might want to double check on that, but there's certainly Pi to JAMA devices that you could use that make it very easy to just retrofit an existing arcade machine. If you're building your own from scratch and using a CRT, you might want to consider using a consumer grade TV and RGB mod that, and then mount it kind of carefully in. So now your speakers are already taken care of. You have direct RGB input. That might be kind of a cool thing to do. Depending on how far you want to go, you could pull the tube out if you wanted to mount it yourself. It's kind of a huge project, but I'm just spitballing ideas. If a smaller one is really what you're looking for, you could buy one of those arcade one-ups, or I think there's an At Games has one with an HDMI input in there as well, if I remember correctly. So you could essentially add a Mister or a Raspberry Pi right through that without much modding. You might even be able to mount it on the inside and kind of go from there, and then use shaders for CRT filters if you wanted a more authentic look. I obviously prefer CRTs, but that's not realistic for everybody. They're big and heavy, and it's a total pain. So I guess that's pretty much the once over into all that. I also would kind of consider what games will they be playing. So if the games that are their favorites are already on the Mister, maybe consider using that instead, because it's a pretty damn incredible experience. If not, Raspberry Pi I think would be good. Question 2, I'm leaning towards buying an EverDrive 64, but I'm not sure which version I should get or where I should buy from. Something about not being able to save games without resetting. Okay. On a related note, I'm also planning on getting a RAD2X cable, but my RGB modded 64 is wired for C-Sync TTL pass-through. Is the RAD2X compatible with all N64 RGB mods? All right, the easy answer to that first, the RAD2X gets sync from composite video. So unless you cut the composite line and routed sync to that, which I'm pretty sure you wouldn't have, that's the only scenario in which you'd have to worry. But if long as you didn't cut composite video from your N64, it should work perfect with every RGB mod. The first part of that, Yeah, like I would go to Stone Age Gamer if you're in the US and you go to their charts. Everything's linked right on the ROM cart page if you need to know exactly which one. And it'll show you which cart has which features, just with the side-by-side comparisons that they do. And I would just choose based on that and see which one you prefer. N64 is not my favorite console, so I just bought the cheaper one. And yes, you do have to hold down reset to save the game. But I don't know. I think the newer version might fix that. So I would just double check, go to the Stone Age Gamer site. If you're out of the US, just go to the main, crix.com and find the link to, I believe it's everdrive.me, and pick it up there. But either one are good. For me personally, I didn't need the extra features, so I got the cheaper one, but check it out and see which one's which for you. Lastly, question 3 or 4, technically. I know it's not technically relevant to RetroRGB, but what's your opinion on RGB lights, gaudy or nifty? It's in the same name after all, so you got to have some idea. Once again, just personal opinion. I don't mean any offense by this, but I think they're useless. However, when I was in my early 20s, every computer I had an awesome looking case with lights, and one of them even had like a monster head as the front of the case with glowing eyes. And I ran back when round IDE cables came out, where they were actually just cut and then stacked on top with a round shielding around it. I got glow in the dark ones, so that even when I powered the PC off, the inside glowed for a few minutes afterwards. So I was really into that for a while. I thought it was the coolest thing to have something lit up. And at the moment, especially because I live in a small apartment, like I don't want lights glowing everywhere. Maybe if I had an office that was separate, I would think it's cool still. But just the thought of a glowing box that's, already obtrusively in the small space I already have would annoy the hell out of me. So just an opinion, though. There's nothing behind that other than how I feel at the moment. I could change my mind tomorrow, but yeah, figured I would just answer honestly. TJ said they bought a few Bluetooth controllers 2 years ago for $43 each and saw them listed brand new on eBay for $330 now. Whether they sell or not, it's a different story, but they want to know what they're missing here on the short history of the price hike. I'm pretty sure it's just scalpers and supply and demand. I have an opinion on this stuff. Once again, it's just an opinion, so please try not to get offended. But it's my opinion that if somebody puts something up on eBay for like $1 or $100 as an auction, and then it sells for $1,000, but it really was only kind of worth $200 or $300. That's nobody's fault. Nobody misled anything. As long as the description and the title are correct, it's just it is what it is. That's what it went for. And I would never think any ill thoughts about the person who sold that. But the other flip side of things, I've been seeing a lot lately. Ever since lockdown, items that that people really want or need. And the big one that I saw was the Elgato Camlink 4Ks, where I've been selling for double what they normally would go for, because a lot of people are doing what I do. They use their cameras as a webcam and route it through the capture card to have higher quality video conferencing and stuff like that. And that stuff to me is real shady. And a lot of people disagree, and all the people that disagree definitely tell me in the comments that they disagree. But I don't like scalping. It's not illegal, but morally speaking, I don't want any part of it. You'll never see me, buy something for, $100 and then turn around and put rare item, $500 on it. And I certainly would never buy from somebody who was doing that. And I think I remember a couple of years ago, somebody on eBay had posted rare Super Nintendo for $700, and it ended up selling for like $550, and it was just a Super Nintendo. There was nothing rare about it. There was nothing different about it. And that really upset me, because somebody with some cash to burn probably thought it really was a rare model that meant something different, and they just got ripped off, and it really annoyed me. So I think what you're seeing is just scalping because of, stuff's running out of stock and people are really needing them. And when they get back in stock, obviously, people would hopefully be smart enough to check on Amazon to make sure they're back in before dropping $330. So it's annoying to see, but yeah, I guess that's just life. I have to go back to last week to answer another question. At the end of all of these Q&As, I always say stuff like, if I missed your question, it either came in after I started recording or I did something silly like accidentally deleted it in post, and that's exactly what happened last week. I didn't realize that I had deleted the answer to David's question, so now I am back re-answering it. And I think I even chimed in here to apologize. So anyway, David said they have a quick question they've never seen anybody cover. There's a lot of tutorials on cleaning cart pins and how to get things back up and running, meaning cartridge slot pins, but I have not seen anything about repairing damaged contacts on a cart. Have you ever come across decent repair techniques for how to do repair? So I've seen two things. The first one I guess you could call controversial, if you will, but I've seen pads get rusted off to the point where, they're gone, or traces getting hurt. Maybe somebody spilled soda in it and eventually corroded the trace away. So in those cases, I've seen people find a similar game, something that's built with the same type of PCB, and then take the ROM chip out and then solder that into the other one, and that's it. I've seen that done a few times. However, if that's a rare game, that's no longer the original PCB. So now did you just make it, did you just take the value away? Is it not authentic? So that's why that one's a bit controversial. Things that are like broken traces. I did see one that was that scenario, which the person wanted everything original. So they just repaired the trace on the board, but the pins or the pads were still fine. For when the pads go, that's something that starts to get dangerous because, first you clean it with isopropyl, isopropyl, and then an eraser, and then isopropyl again. And if there's rust on it, or if the pad has been eaten away, you could do things like use a fiberglass pen. Essentially what you're doing is scraping off the rusted area. But at that point, now, the rust is gone, but what happens if that exposes part of the pad? Are you eventually going to rip the pad off? Is there any kind of coating you could put on it that's like, and here's where it starts to get iffy because I don't know the right answer. Maybe you could do something like put the tiniest bit of super glue on on the back side of it to hold it down, and just be super careful that it doesn't stick up too much, so you're not putting more pressure on the cartridge slot pins. You kind of have to get creative at that point. So if you have cartridges that are like that, maybe post some pictures and I could ask some experts their opinion, but it's tricky. It's one of these things where maybe use a fiberglass pen to clean it off, but then just play the game on a ROM cart and keep that in your collection just to have. I don't know. So sorry, after waiting, a week and a half to get your answer, that I don't have a great one. And lastly, Shane Kirby had a question, but this was one of the ones that wasn't able to post on Patreon, so I just asked him to direct message me. The question is, they have a Super NT and a Mega SG going into the DAC and hooked up via component to their 27-inch Trinitron FV310. The issue comes up when they switch to 320 resolution Genesis games. The image moves to the right about half a square in the 240p test suite. Any ideas what would cause this, or is it just a normal thing? And if it's not normal, is it fixable? I also had Shane confirm that the switch doesn't affect it at all. Just going directly from the Mega SG to the DAC to the TV does the same thing. I have not heard of this happening. And if it's one of these things where when you say half a square, if you mean like the grid pattern, that's a pretty far shift over. If you mean like just a couple of pixels, I would probably just try to ignore it. It could be something with your Trinitron. Do you have an original Genesis to confirm that it's just not the way those games are overscanning? That would be one way to just verify it. If not, I'm not really sure. It could be is there any setting inside the Mega SG that would allow you to fix centering? I know there would be something for the HDMI output, but probably not through the DAC. And I don't think I've heard anybody else complain about it. And I certainly didn't see a major shift when I was testing it on an RGB monitor. So I would just double check your TV to make sure that there's not something you could do. The easiest way, once again, would be to test against an original Genesis. And if that's the case, go into your service menu, shift it over, and then hopefully that's all it takes. But that's a really good one. I would take a picture of it and certainly send it to Analog for troubleshooting if it's something that's a big difference. The other thing, too, is I don't know if I've tested the component video output in that scenario. I think I've always tested RGB output. So it's possible that there's an issue with that, but that's an interesting question. So if anybody knows the answer to that one, please feel free to chime in as well. Well, that's it for this time. As always, thanks so much to everybody that participates in these. Once again, please chime in on your opinions on how to structure the Q&As, the YouTube channels. I don't want to mess anything up. I think it might sound selfish, but I worked really hard to get here, and I just want to keep getting better. I don't want to make the wrong decision and screw everything up for everybody. So any opinions you all have on that would be really appreciated. Also, if you're new to the Q&As, ask any question at all that you would like wherever it is that you support. Because of the YouTube algorithm, I have to leave comments turned on the YouTube videos, but this really is a thank you to everybody that supports. And while everybody's always welcome to listen, of course, this interaction is with supporters. So no disrespect to everybody else. I spend an unhealthy amount of time responding to every other video's comments. These are really just a thank you for supporters. So thank you all very much, and I will see you next week.